The Seattle skyline was a jagged crown of glass and steel, glowing with a deceptive bruised purple as the sun dipped behind the Olympic Mountains. For Julian Thorne, the chief financial officer of Thorne Global Logistics, this was the hour of the great calculation. From his 40th floor sanctuary, the world below was reduced to a series of manageable, silent patterns. He watched the rhythmic pulse of brake lights on I-5, the tiny dots of pedestrians scurrying like ants, and the cargo ships navigating the Puget Sound. To Julian, life was an equation that always needed to balance. If a variable didn't contribute to the bottom line, it was discarded. At 38, Julian was a masterpiece of corporate engineering. His suits were bespoke Italian wool, his hair was trimmed with surgical precision, and his heart, though he wouldn't admit it, had become a fossil. He lived in a penthouse that was featured in architectural digests, a place of white marble and minimalist art that felt more like a mausoleum for his youth than a home. He had no wife, no children, and friends who were merely strategic alliances. He was successful, wealthy, and profoundly hollow. He spent his evenings reviewing spreadsheets, the blue light of his monitor reflecting in his eyes like a digital frost. He believed that control was the only antidote to chaos. He had forgotten the smell of rain, the sound of laughter that wasn't forced, and the feeling of skin that wasn't polished by expensive lotions. On this particular Tuesday, a rare glitch occurred in his routine. His driver, Arthur, had texted to say the limousine had a blown tire 3 blocks away. Usually Julian would have waited in the lobby, fuming at the inefficiency. But today, the office felt suffocating. The air conditioning had been too cold, the coffee too bitter, and the merger meeting too long. He decided to walk. He needed to feel the pavement beneath his feet, if only to remind himself that he was still anchored to the earth. As he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the raw, damp air of an October evening hit him. It was a sensory shock. The smell of roasted coffee beans from a nearby cafe mingled with the salty tang of the Sound and the metallic scent of rain-slicked pavement. He turned the corner toward a small municipal park, a rectangle of struggling greenery wedged between 2 monolithic office towers. It was a place usually ignored by people in his tax bracket, a place of transit, not a destination. Then he saw her. On a weathered wooden bench, tucked beneath the skeletal branches of a thinning maple tree, sat a young woman. She wasn't just sitting, she was guarding a fortress. Slumped against her side was a small boy, perhaps 4 years old, wrapped in a faded denim jacket that was far too large for him. The woman's eyes were closed, her face etched with a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the flickering orange glow of a street lamp, and her hands were locked tightly around the straps of a tattered, overflowing backpack. She looked like a ghost trapped in a world of concrete. Julian stopped. His polished leather shoes felt heavy on the cracked sidewalk. It wasn't the sight of homelessness that gave him pause. Seattle's streets were a testament to the city's wealth gap, but rather the sheer, terrifying vulnerability of the scene. The boy stirred, shivering as a gust of wind whistled through the park, and the mother instinctively pulled him closer, her arms tightening around him even in her half-conscious state. It was a display of primal, selfless love that Julian hadn't witnessed in years. He looked at his watch. It was a $50,000 Patek Philippe. The ticking of the second hand felt like a heartbeat. He looked back at the woman. She looked no older than 25, yet she carried the weight of a century. A sudden, inexplicable surge of discomfort washed over him. It wasn't pity. Pity was a distant, condescending emotion. This was a crack in his insulation. For the first time in a decade, the numbers in Julian's head, the interest rates, the dividends, the profit margins, fell silent. All he could see was the shivering shoulder of a child and the desperate grip of a mother. The park was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic. The wind picked up, swirling dead leaves around the base of the bench. Julian felt the cold biting through his expensive coat. If he felt it, what did they feel? The woman's jacket was thin, a polyester blend that offered no protection against the Pacific Northwest dampness. Her shoes were worn at the heels, the fabric fraying. He stood there for a long minute, a man who usually made decisions in milliseconds. He felt the weight of his own luxury, the sheer absurdity of his problems compared to the silent struggle happening 10 feet away. He realized that if he walked away now, he wouldn't just be ignoring a person. He would be abandoning the last shred of his own humanity. He took a step forward, then another. He was entering a territory where his wealth meant nothing, and his title carried no weight. He was just a man in a suit approaching a woman who had every reason to fear him. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a sensation more real than anything he'd felt in years. Julian approached the bench with the caution of someone walking through a minefield. He was acutely aware of the contrast he presented, the charcoal grey of his suit against the grime of the park, the scent of expensive cologne clashing with the smell of damp earth and neglect. He stopped 5 feet away, not wanting to loom over them or trigger the flight response he knew was common among the city's displaced. He kept his hands visible, away from his pockets, trying to project a stillness he didn't actually feel. Despite his silence, the woman's eyes snapped open. They were hazel, wide, sharp, and filled with a survivalist's instinct. In a single, fluid motion, she shifted her body, shielding her son from Julian's view. Her hand reached into her pocket, gripping something, perhaps a phone, perhaps a key, with white-knuckled intensity. She looked at him, not with hope, but with a profound, weary suspicion. She had seen men in suits before. Usually they were the ones telling her to move along or calling the police. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said, her voice a low, raspy warning. "We aren't bothering anyone, we're just resting. We'll be moving on in a minute, I know the rules." Julian held up his hands, palms open. "I'm not a police officer. I'm not here to move you." She didn't relax. Her eyes darted to his watch, then back to his face. "Then what do you want?" "If you're looking for the bistro, it's 2 blocks that way. If you're looking to give me a lecture on personal responsibility, save your breath. I've heard it all from the social workers who don't have enough beds and the pastors who offer prayers instead of blankets." Julian felt a pang of genuine shame. He had been one of those people who looked at the homeless as a logistical problem to be solved by someone else's taxes, a blight on the aesthetic of the city he helped manage. "I'm not here to lecture you," he said softly, his voice catching slightly. "My name is Julian. I work in the building right there." He pointed toward the Thorn Global Tower, its crown glowing like a beacon of unreachable wealth. The woman followed his gaze, then looked back at him with a bitter, dry laugh. "Must be nice, having a view of the park instead of a view of the dirt. What is it? You looked down and saw a blemish on your landscape." "It's getting cold," Julian said, shifting the subject to the immediate reality. "The weather report says it'll drop below 40 tonight. With the dampness, that's dangerous for a child. He's shivering, Elena." The woman flinched at the use of a name she hadn't given him, then realized he was just guessing at the human element. "I know how cold it is. I've been counting the minutes until the sun goes down for 3 weeks. We have blankets." She gestured to a thin, moth-eaten fleece tucked inside her bag. The boy Leo woke up fully now. He rubbed his eyes with small, grimy fists and looked at Julian with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "Mommy, is the man going to take our bag? Is he the one who says we have to go?" "No, baby," she whispered, her voice softening instantly for the child, a transformation that hit Julian harder than her anger. "The man is just leaving. Go back to sleep." "I'm not," Julian said firmly. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out his business card, a thick embossed piece of cardstock. He held it out. She didn't take it at first, staring at it as if it were a trap or a summons. Finally, curiosity, or perhaps a flicker of desperation, won, and she snatched it. "Chief Financial Officer," she read aloud, her voice dripping with irony. "Well, Mr. CFO, what does your math tell you about us? Are we a bad investment? Are we a line item you need to erase?" "I think you're in a situation that doesn't define who you are," Julian replied, stepping a half-inch closer. "I saw you from my office, not just today, but yesterday too. I didn't say anything then. I should have. I watched you share your last bit of food with him. Please, let me help you get somewhere warm. There's a boutique hotel 2 blocks from here. I have an account there. I can get you a room, a hot meal, and a safe place to sleep. No strings, no questions. No one will bother you." The woman searched his face. She was looking for the predatory gleam, the condescension, or the hidden agenda that usually accompanied kindness in her world. She found none. Julian's face, usually a mask of corporate stoicism, was open and filled with an urgent, almost desperate sincerity. He looked like a man who was drowning and realized she was the only one who could pull him out, not the other way around. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "You don't know us. You could be anyone." "Because I realized tonight that I've spent my life building walls," Julian said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "And for some reason, looking at you, I realized those walls were keeping me in more than they were keeping the world out. I have the means to change your night. Why wouldn't I? Let me do this. For the boy. For Leo." The boy looked at his mother, his teeth chattering. "Mommy, I'm cold. My toes hurt. Can we go to the marshmallow bed?" That was the breaking point. The woman's shoulders slumped. The fire in her eyes didn't go out, but it settled into a weary, flickering ember of hope. A single tear tracked through the dust on her cheek, leaving a clean line of salt. "My name is Elena," she said, her voice trembling. "And this is Leo. We don't have anywhere else to go. The shelters are full, and the car is gone." "Then you're with me now," Julian said, offering a hand to help her up. His hand was warm, hers was like ice. "Come with me, let me help you." The walk to the hotel was the longest 3 blocks of Julian's life. He carried Elena's heavy, tattered backpack. It was surprisingly light, filled mostly with clothes and a few plastic toys, the sum total of a life reduced to fabric. Elena carried Leo, her steps heavy and hesitant. Passers-by in their evening finery stared. A man in a $5,000 suit, walking alongside a woman who looked like she had crawled out of a storm drain. Julian felt their stares like physical weights, but for the first time in his career, he didn't care about the optics. He felt a strange, surging sense of purpose that made the merger he'd signed that morning seem like child's play. The lobby of the Hotel Grand Sentinel was a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen rain, and the scent of expensive lilies and floor wax filled the air. It was a place where people spoke in whispers, and the carpet swallowed the sound of footsteps. As they entered, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The concierge, a man Julian had known for years named Pierre, straightened his waistcoat, his eyes widening as he took in Elena's stained jeans and Leo's messy hair. Pierre's professional mask slipped for a microsecond into a look of pure, unadulterated judgment. "Mr. Thorne," Pierre said, his voice a tight chord of professional confusion, "can I assist you with something? Is there a problem?" Julian stepped forward, placing his black titanium credit card on the marble counter, with a sharp, echoing clack. He didn't look at Pierre's face. He looked through him. "The presidential suite, Pierre. Now." "Sir, the suite is reserved for the delegation from—" "I don't care who it's reserved for," Julian interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low frequency that stopped the chatter in the lobby. "Move them, upgrade them, downgrade them. I don't care. I want the suite. I want a full dinner service for 3 sent up immediately. Kid-friendly options, high protein and plenty of fruit. And I want the 24-hour valet to find a local clothing store that's still open. I need a full wardrobe for a woman and a 4-year-old boy. High quality, warm. No logos. Just comfort." Pierre nodded quickly, sensing the immovable wall that was Julian Thorne's will. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. Right away. My apologies." They rode the gold-leafed elevator in silence. Leo stared at his reflection in the polished metal, touching the buttons with wonder. Elena stood in the corner, clutching her arms, looking like she wanted to bolt. The sheer luxury was an assault on her senses. When the doors opened to the suite, the scale of the room was overwhelming. There were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a fireplace crackling with artificial warmth, and beds draped in Egyptian cotton. Leo let out a tiny gasp and ran toward the bed, falling face first into the plush duvet. "Mommy! It's like a marshmallow! It's even better than the car seat!" Eleanor didn't move from the threshold. She stood by the door, her eyes fixed on Julian. This is too much. You're making a mistake. When you wake up tomorrow and the adrenaline wears off, you're going to realize how much this cost and you're going to regret it. You're going to think I tricked you." Julian walked over to the window, looking out at the park they had just left. From here, the bench was invisible, lost in the shadows of the skyscrapers. "I've spent millions on art I don't look at and cars I don't drive, Elena. This is the first time I've spent money and felt like it actually existed. There's a shower in there with more hot water than you can use. There are robes in the closet. The food will be here in 20 minutes. He turned back to her. He saw the bruises under her eyes and the way her hands still shook. "I'm going to go now. I'll be back at 8 tomorrow morning to check on you. Please, and don't disappear in the night. I know you're used to running, but you don't have to run from me. I want to help you with what comes next." "What comes next?" Elena asked, her voice small. She looked around the room as if it were a beautiful cage. "A life," Julian said simply. "One where you don't have to guard a backpack while your son sleeps. One where you can breathe without wondering if the next breath is your last. Rest, Elena. You've earned it." As he walked out and the heavy oak door clicked shut, Julian felt a shiver. He went down to the lobby, but he didn't call Arthur. He walked all the way to his penthouse, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, feeling the phantom weight of the backpack he had carried. He realized he didn't even know what he was doing. He was a CFO, not a social worker, but for the first time in his career, he didn't need a spreadsheet to know he was right. He sat in his dark living room, staring at the space where a family should be, and realized he had been as homeless as Eleanor, just in a much more expensive way. The next morning, Julian returned to the hotel with a sense of dread. His logical brain, the one that had made him a billionaire, was screaming that they would be gone. He expected an empty room and a hefty bill. Instead, he found Eleanor and Leo in the breakfast nook of the suite. The transformation was startling. Eleanor had washed her hair. It was a deep chestnut brown, pulled back in a neat ponytail. She was wearing a simple cream-colored sweater and soft trousers from the clothes he'd ordered. She looked like she belonged in the room, yet her eyes still held that flicker of the park bench, a hypervigilance that wouldn't fade easily. Leo was happily devouring a plate of pancakes, his face covered in syrup. He looked at Julian and grinned. "The juice is orange, Julian. Real orange." Julian sat across from them, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. "I'm glad you stayed." "I didn't have anywhere else to go," Eleanor said, her voice steadier now, though she didn't meet his eyes. "And I wanted to say thank you. For the shower, for the food. I haven't felt clean in a month." Over the next 2 hours, the story came out. Elena wasn't a statistic. She was a woman who had been systematically dismantled by life. She had been a legal assistant in Portland, living a comfortable middle-class life. Then her husband, David, was diagnosed with aggressive leukemia. They had insurance, but the out-of-pocket costs and the experimental treatments had liquidated their savings in a year. After David died, the hospital bills didn't stop. Elena had sold everything. The car was the last thing to go, but it had broken down in Seattle, and she'd been forced to sell it for scrap just to buy a week's worth of food and diapers. "I have a degree," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of shame and fierce pride. "I have 5 years of experience in corporate law and compliance. I know how to file motions, I know how to track assets, and I know how to manage a schedule. But when you don't have an address, you don't exist. When you look like I did yesterday, people don't see a resume. They see a problem." Julian listened, his analytical mind already building a structure. He didn't want to just give her a check. That was a temporary fix, and Julian dealt in long-term growth. "I have a position opening in our compliance department," Julian said, watching her carefully. "It's entry-level, but it's a foot in the door. It comes with a salary, full health insurance for you and Leo, and a future. But you can't work if you're living in a hotel or on the street." He took out a set of keys from his pocket. "I own a small apartment complex near the office. It's usually for visiting executives or temporary hires. 1 unit is vacant. It's yours for 6 months, rent-free. After that, we'll see where you are. Consider it a bridge, Elena. I'm not giving you a gift. I'm making an investment in a talent that the world was stupid enough to throw away." Elena stared at the keys as if they were made of hot coals. "I can't." I can't repay this, Julian. Not for a long time. You don't repay it to me, he replied, leaning forward. You do the job. You show up. You prove me right. And you take care of that boy. That's the only ROI I care about. Elena looked at Leo, then back at Julian. The wall of her pride, which had been her only protection for months, finally crumbled. She reached out and took the keys, her fingers brushing his. For the first time she smiled, a small tentative thing that lit up her face. I'll be the best employee you've ever had, she whispered. Transitions are never as seamless as they appear in movies. While Eleanor was a hard worker, her presence at Thorn Global Logistics sparked whispers that spread like a virus. In the polished, often cold world of high finance, someone from the street was seen as a liability, a contaminant. Julian's business partner, Marcus, a man who valued image and pedigree above all else, was the first to strike. He walked into Julian's office 3 weeks after Eleanor started, throwing a folder onto the desk. Julian, we need to talk about your project in compliance, Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. Her name is Elena, Marcus, and she's doing excellent work, Julian replied, without looking up from his monitor. People are talking, Julian. The interns saw her in the park before she started. The rumors are that you're playing pretty woman with the company's reputation. Our investors expect us to hire from Harvard and Stanford, not from the municipal park. It looks like a charity project, and in this market, charity is seen as weakness. Julian stood up, his height and presence filling the room. She is a qualified legal assistant who survived a situation that would have broken you in 3 days, Marcus. She's outperforming the Ivy League kids because she knows what it means to actually lose something. She doesn't take her desk for granted. If the investors have a problem with me hiring talent based on merit, rather than zip code, they can talk to me directly. But the pressure wasn't just on Julian. Elena felt it every day. She felt the cold stares in the break room when she used the microwave. She saw the way the other assistants stopped talking when she entered the room. She felt the weight of her past every time she had to fill out a form or speak in a meeting. She was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to realize she had slept on a bench and decide she didn't belong on the 40th floor. One afternoon she found Julian in the hallway. She looked pale, her eyes darting around. "I don't think I can do this, Julian," she whispered. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up. Every time Marcus looks at me, I feel like he's looking through my clothes at the dirt I couldn't wash off for weeks. I'm making you look bad." Julian took her by the arm and led her into an empty conference room. He didn't offer a platitude. Instead, he told her a truth he'd never told anyone. "When I started this company, Elena, I slept on the floor of this very office because I couldn't afford a bed and the lease at the same time. I washed my face in the public restroom in the lobby. I wore the same suit for a year and brushed it every night with a hairbrush to keep it looking new. Everyone in this building is hiding a struggle, or they're too shallow to have one. You aren't playing dress-up, you're returning to where you belong. Don't let their lack of imagination define your reality. You're an asset, not a secret." That night, Julian didn't go home to his penthouse. He went to the apartment complex and helped Leo build a Lego tower. He was finding that the bridge he had built for Elena was something he was crossing too, back into a world of human connection, where the most important thing wasn't the closing price of a stock, but the steady breathing of a child who finally felt safe. The fragile stability Elena had built over the last 2 months felt like a glass sculpture in a windstorm. She had a routine. Wake up at 6 a.m., prepare Leo's lunch, drop him at the daycare center Julian had helped her find, and be at her desk by 8:30 a.m. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of "where will we sleep" had been replaced by the mundane, beautiful stress of "what's for dinner." But trauma is a shadow that lingers, and for Elena, the fear of losing it all was a physical presence in her chest. It happened on a Tuesday, the same day of the week Julian had found them. Leo came home from daycare with a slight cough and flushed cheeks. By 10 p.m. his forehead was burning. Eleanor, sitting on the edge of his bed in the small, clean apartment, felt a cold spike of adrenaline. To any other mother, this was a common childhood illness. To Elena, it was a terrifying echo of the past. Her husband's illness had started with a slight fever. In her mind, she was already back on that park bench, Leo shivering in her arms with no money for medicine and no roof to shelter him. By midnight, Leo's temperature hit 103 degrees. He was whimpering in his sleep, his small body tossing under the duvet. Elena paced the living room, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked at her phone. She didn't want to be the needy one. She didn't want Julian to see her as a burden. She wanted to be the strong, independent employee he had invested in. But as Leo let out a sharp, ragged cough, her resolve broke. She dialed Julian's number, her hand shaking so hard she nearly dropped the phone. Julian answered on the second ring. "Eleanor, is everything okay?" His voice was clear, devoid of the sleepiness one would expect at 2 a.m. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called," she sobbed, the dam of her composure finally bursting. "It's Leo. He's so hot, Julian. I've tried the cool cloths, I've tried the Tylenol, but he's shaking. I'm scared. I'm so scared I'm going to lose him, and then I'll lose the job because I'm not there, and then we'll be back." "Stop," Julian said, his voice a firm, calm anchor. "Breathe, Elena. I'm coming. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't worry about the job. Don't worry about anything but Leo." Julian arrived in record time, wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, a stark contrast to the CFO persona. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped Leo in a thick blanket and carried him to his car. During the drive to the private pediatric clinic, Julian talked to Elena in a low, steady voice, telling her stories about his own childhood to keep her grounded. He wasn't the billionaire tonight. He was a man protecting his own. The waiting room was sterile and quiet. Julian sat next to Elena, his presence a physical barrier against her panic. For 6 hours, they waited. Julian didn't look at his watch once. He didn't check his emails. He simply sat there, his hand resting near hers, providing the silent support she had lacked for so many years. When the doctor finally emerged to say it was a severe but manageable case of the flu, Eleanor collapsed against Julian's chest. The relief was so absolute it was exhausting. "He's going to be okay," Julian whispered into her hair, his arms around her. "And you're going to be okay. I'm not just your boss, Elena. I'm your friend. And friends don't let friends face the dark alone." In that hospital room, as the sun began to rise over Seattle, the last of the professional distance between them dissolved. Julian realized that his investment had long since become personal. He wasn't just saving a family. He was being saved from the isolation of his own success. The annual Thorn Global Charity Gala was the social event of the year in Seattle. It was a night of black ties, silk gowns, and calculated generosity. Usually Julian hated these events. He saw them as a theater of vanity, where the wealthy paid for the privilege of feeling good about themselves without ever actually seeing the people they were helping. This year, however, he had a different plan. "I want you to be my guest," Julian said to Elena a week before the event. Elena looked up from a compliance report, her eyes wide. "Julian, I can't. Look at me. I'm finally fitting in at my desk, but the gala, that's Marcus's world. They'll eat me alive if they find out where I came from." "Let them try," Julian said, a predatory glint in his eye. "You are the most resilient person I know. You belong in that room more than anyone who was born with a silver spoon. I want the world to see the face of the statistics they talk about." The night of the gala, the ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel was a sea of shimmering gold and crystal. Eleanor arrived in a deep emerald silk gown that Julian had insisted on gifting her. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck. She looked breathtaking, but inside she was a knot of nerves. As they entered, the whispers began. The mystery woman on Julian Thorne's arm was the talk of the evening. Marcus approached them near the bar, a champagne glass in his hand and a sneer on his face. "Quite a transformation, Julian, but be careful. You can put a diamond on a piece of coal, but it's still carbon underneath. Some of our investors are asking questions about the background of your guest." Julian didn't flinch. He leaned in, his voice a low, cold warning. "Careful, Marcus. That carbon was formed under more pressure than you've ever felt in your life. It's what makes it a diamond." When it was time for Julian to give the keynote speech, the room went silent. He stood at the podium, looking out at the rows of Seattle's elite. He didn't use the prepared speech about logistics and market shares. Instead, he told a story. He told the story of a woman he saw on a bench. He described the cold, the hunger, and the sheer, terrifying strength it took for her to shield her son from the world. He didn't name Eleanor, but he looked at her throughout the speech. "We sit here tonight and donate thousands to feel like we've done our part," Julian's voice echoed. "But true impact isn't a check. It's a bridge. It's looking at someone who has fallen and saying, 'I see you and I will help you stand.' I met someone who had nothing, and she taught me that my wealth was a prison of my own making. She showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else, like the love for a child, is more important than that fear." The silence in the ballroom was profound. For the first time, the charity wasn't abstract. It was human. When Julian finished, the applause wasn't the polite, rhythmic clapping of a bored audience. It was genuine. Eleanor stood tall, her eyes wet with tears, realizing that she no longer had to hide. Her past wasn't a stain. It was her strength. Just as Eleanor began to feel like the ground beneath her feet was finally solid, the ghost of her old life returned. It appeared in the form of Silas, her late husband's brother. Silas was a man who had inherited the family's darker traits, greed, resentment, and a parasitic nature. When David was dying, Silas had refused to help, claiming bad investments had left him broke. Now, seeing Elena in the local society pages draped in emerald silk, he saw a new opportunity. He cornered her in the lobby of the Thorn Global Tower one rainy afternoon. "Well, well, Elena, you certainly moved up in the world. From a park bench to a billionaire's arm. David would be so surprised." Elena felt a familiar coldness grip her heart. "What do you want, Silas? I have work to do." "I want what's fair," Silas sneered, stepping into her personal space. "I've fallen on hard times, and here you are living in luxury. I'm sure your new boyfriend wouldn't want the press to know that his star employee and lover is a woman who neglected her dying husband's family. I could tell some very creative stories to the tabloids about your stability as a mother." It was a classic shakedown. For a moment, the old Elena, the one who lived in fear, wanted to reach for her checkbook just to make him go away. She felt the shame of her homelessness bubbling up, the fear that Silas could actually ruin this new life. But then, she looked at the security guard at the desk who had greeted her by name. She looked at the badge clipped to her blazer. She wasn't that woman anymore. "You have 5 minutes to leave this building, Silas," Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I have no money for you, and if you go to the press, I'll have Julian's legal team, the same team that handles billion-dollar mergers, file a defamation suit that will leave you in debt for the rest of your life. I am not afraid of you." Silas laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "You think you're one of them now? You're a charity case, Elena. Nothing more." "No!" Julian's voice boomed from the elevator bank. He had been walking toward the lobby for lunch and heard the exchange. He stepped forward, his eyes like flint. "She isn't a charity case. She's the woman who is going to have you escorted out by the police if you don't leave. I've heard enough. Extortion is a felony in this state, Silas. Would you like to test how much I'm willing to spend on a private investigator to find every dark corner of your life?" Silas looked between the two of them, saw the united front of iron and silk, and realized his leverage was gone. He turned and fled into the Seattle rain. Eleanor leaned against a marble pillar, her heart racing. Julian walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You handled that perfectly, Elena. You didn't need me." "I did, actually," she whispered. "I needed to know you were there, but I'm glad I said it first." The 6-month mark of Eleanor's employment arrived like a milestone of a marathon. The bridge Julian had built was now a solid path. Eleanor had saved enough money for a down payment on a modest but beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, with a good school for Leo. It was time for her to move out of the executive apartment. She sat in Julian's office late on a Friday afternoon. The sun was setting, casting a long golden glow over the mahogany desk. She placed the keys to the apartment on the desk. "It's time, Julian." Julian looked at the keys, then up at her. He felt a strange, hollow sensation in his chest. Over the last 6 months, they had become a team. They had shared dinners, navigated corporate crises, and watched Leo grow into a confident, happy boy. "I'm happy for you, Elena, truly. It's what we worked for." "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, standing up and walking to the window. "But I need to know I can stand on my own. I need Leo to see that his mum built this for him, that we aren't just guests in someone else's life." Julian walked over to stand beside her. The city looked different to him now. It wasn't just a grid of profit and loss. It was a collection of stories of people struggling and succeeding. "I'm going to miss the morning updates on Leo's soccer games," Julian admitted, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "You don't have to miss them," Elena said, turning to face him. She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "The house has a backyard and a guest room, and Leo expects you to be there for his birthday next Saturday. He's already told everyone his Uncle Julian is a superhero." Julian laughed, a genuine deep sound. "A superhero? I'm just a guy who knows how to read a balance sheet." "No," Elena whispered, stepping closer. "You're the man who saw me when I was invisible. That's the only kind of magic that matters." In the quiet of the office, Julian realized that his life had undergone a fundamental shift. He didn't want the solitude of his penthouse anymore. He wanted the noise of a family. He wanted the responsibility of love. He leaned down and kissed her, a soft, certain promise of a future that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with the heart. A year had passed since Julian walked away from his limousine and toward a park bench. It was a crisp October evening, the air smelling of fallen leaves and the coming rain. Julian and Eleanor walked through the same municipal park, but it looked different now. Julian had funded a complete renovation, new lighting, better security, and a community center nearby that provided resources for families in crisis. They stopped at the spot where the old weathered bench had been. In its place was a beautiful stone bench, surrounded by hardy, colorful flowers. On it was a bronze plaque that read, "For those who are tired, sit, rest, and know that you are seen. A bridge is always closer than it appears." Leo was running across the grass, his laughter ringing out as he chased a golden retriever they had adopted. He was healthy, strong, and entirely unaware that his life had been saved on this very spot. "Do you ever think about it?" Julian asked, looking at the stone bench. "The night we met?" "Every day," Elena replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I think about how cold I was, and I think about the moment you handed me that card. You didn't just give me money, Julian. You gave me back my name. You gave me back my belief that I mattered." "I think about it too," Julian said, watching Leo. "I think about how close I came to just walking to that bistro and never stopping. I think about the man I was, the one who thought he had everything because his bank account was full. I was the one who was homeless, Elena. I just had a roof over my head." Julian's bridge program had become a national model for corporate social responsibility, but for him, the greatest success was sitting right next to him. They weren't a fairy tale. They were a testament to the power of human empathy and the courage to change. As the Seattle sun set, painting the towers in shades of amber and rose, they sat together on the bench. They were no longer a billionaire and a homeless woman. They were two people who had built a life out of kindness and resilience. The city hummed around them, a vast, complex machine, but here, in this small patch of green, there was only the warmth of a family and the quiet, enduring legacy of a single act of compassion. "Come with me," Julian whispered, echoing his words from a year ago. "I'm already there," Eleanor replied, and together they walked home.